Hello, I'm Kerr. Welcome to my art studio. Granulation in watercolour paint is when the little particles in the paint all collect together in little clumps, and then when the paint is dry it has a mottled effect. Now in this video I'm going to demonstrate for you some paints that do granulate and some paints that don't granulate, so you can decide which ones you prefer. I'll also introduce you to a medium that you can use to add to your paints that will make them granulate even more. So, are you ready? I'll do a little demonstration for you to show you some granulating paints and some paints that don't granulate, so you can see the difference. Now I'm going to paint 5 colours that granulate and 4 colours that don't granulate, and while I'm painting them I'll tell you something about granulation. Now these are all Daniel Smith colours except this one, which is Winsor & Newton, only because I prefer the colour. So that's just to let you know what the manufacturer is. So let's start off with the Lunar Black. Now Lunar Black is a colour I don't use very often, but I wanted to put it on here because it's a wonderful colour for just showing you how it granulates. I'm going to do some strong colour at the top and then I'll water it down so that you can see the effect. And we'll have to wait for these to dry off before we can really notice the granulation coming through. Now this is French ultramarine. The difference between French ultramarine and ultramarine is that French ultramarine is a little bit more granulating and it does tend to be a little bit warmer. But it's very, very subtle, the difference between the French ultramarine and the ultramarine. So that's that one. The next one is the Winsor & Newton Cerulean Blue. As I said, it's only because I prefer the colour of this particular one. As I say, I'll water that down so you can you see the granulation coming? Now granulation is when all the little particles in the paint stick together in little clumps and form a spotty effect. Now this is a wonderful colour that I've recently started using. I don't often use ready-made greens, but this one, I have to admit, has won me over. Because I'm basically a landscape painter, this in landscapes is just magical. Look at that. Now if you're painting something that you want a very smooth, flawless finish, perhaps you're painting a portrait or something like that, then probably granulation is not your best friend. It just depends on your style and what you're actually going to be painting. There are no rules, it's just personal choice. Now this is a wonderful colour called Graphite, which is really a brown ochre. Very, very similar to yellow ochre, but just that little bit darker. And because I keep raw sienna in my palette, yellow ochre and raw sienna are very similar. So I can't see the point in keeping them both. So that's why I have a little bit of goethite around, because I just think it's that little bit darker. Can you see the granulation coming here? Isn't that fabulous? As I say, it might not be what you want in your particular work, but if you do want granulation, then the Daniel Smith paints, a lot of them do granulate. So that could be something that may put you off buying them if you want a very smooth surface, which is what we're going to be doing here with the colours that don't actually granulate. Now this is indigo, another one of my really favourite colours. If you haven't looked at it already, I've made a video about indigo. I'll put a link to that up on the screen and at the end of the video. Now this colour on some papers will do what it calls flare, which means you get little lines appearing rather than the granulation. Now that looks as though it's granulated, doesn't it? But when it's dry, it'll look very different. Let's make that nice and even. Now we'll have a look at quinacridone gold. Most of the quinacridones don't granulate. Another one of my really favourite colours. It's a beautiful warm yellow. Fabulous warm yellow. It's a very fierce colour, you don't need much of it. Now some of the really cheap paints that are made from coloured dyes, obviously these professional paints are made from minerals, but the very cheap paints have no minerals in them whatsoever, and they're made of coloured dyes. And it's quite difficult to get those to granulate. Now when I've finished this and I let them dry, I'm going to show you how to use something called granulation fluid. So that'll be a nice thing to do while we're waiting for all this to dry. A little word of advice, don't get too hung up on doing hundreds and hundreds of colour swatches. I knew a lady once who took me into her room where she did all her painting, and she was so excited, and she showed me all these wonderful colour swatches that she'd done. There was hundreds of them, all pinned up on the wall. It looked very impressive, but she'd never painted a single picture. So, you know, doing this can be very addictive. So just be a little bit careful. Don't spend all your day doing colour swatches and don't actually paint any pictures, because the way to learn to paint is to paint pictures or to paint techniques. I don't believe in rushing in and painting a whole picture first time round. You have to learn the techniques slowly and carefully. Right, now we'll let all those dry off and then we'll come back and have a look and see what we've got. Right, those are really nice and dry now, and you can definitely notice the granulation in these ones at the top. And the ones down here are very smooth with little or no granulation. Now, if you want to buy granulating paints, then every manufacturer will have a different way of, one manufacturer's burnt umber will be granulating, another manufacturer's burnt umber won't be. So you need to look on the manufacturer's website, or if it isn't actually printed on the tube itself, to find out whether or not it's granulating. Because I know some people have bought granulating paints and then this happens in their painting and they get very disappointed because they don't realise that there is a difference between those that do granulate and those that don't granulate. For example, many people don't like to use ultramarine blue in their skies because you get this spotty effect. Other people think this is wonderful in their skies. So it's absolutely down to personal choice. As I said before, there's no rights, there's no wrongs. It all depends on your individual style of working. So do be aware when you're buying paints that if you get this effect, it's not necessarily something that you're doing wrong or something that's wrong with the paper. You might have bought a granulating paint and you didn't realise it. Now I'm going to show you some granulation medium. So this is Winsor & Newton's granulation medium. Other manufacturers make exactly the same thing. This just happens to be the one that I've got. They all do the same thing, and there isn't one that's better than another. So I'll show you how to use this. Now the idea of granulation medium is to make your paints granulate. And it depends on the manufacturer, it depends on the paints as to which ones will granulate and which ones won't. You just have to experiment with that. I couldn't possibly tell you every single paint that's going to be successful and those that aren't. It's just down to experimentation. So what I want to do first is to make my piece of paper wet. And then I'm going to let the shine begin to go off the paper, and I'm going to drop in some ink. And you might think, well, why are you using ink when you're talking about watercolours? Well, on camera the ink is going to show up much better than the watercolour when I'm using the granulation fluid, and for no other reason. I've tried it with the watercolours, but it doesn't come out very well on camera, but it has exactly the same effect. So the fact that this is ink isn't going to make any difference whatsoever. So here I've got some acrylic ink, and I'm just going to drop some of that. I'm running out of ink here. Drop some of that onto my paper. Love this. I love making a mess. We just move that round a bit, and then we'll take some granulation fluid and then we'll have a little pipette, pop it in there, get some granulation fluid, put your bottle out of the way because you will knock it over. Don't ask me how I know that. And drop in your granulation fluid and watch what happens. Wow! Can you see here? Can you see that wonderful granulation? As I said earlier, it's not, excuse me, it's not quite as obvious when I'm using watercolour paints as it is when I'm using the inks. So just for the sake of the camera, this was the better option. Can you see? All the little particles in the ink, the same thing will happen in the paint, are all collecting together in little clumps and causing this spotty effect. Now how wonderful that would be for the branch of a tree, especially if you're doing something like abstract work and you've got sort of a suggestion of a tree or a branch, or you've got a bird sitting on a branch. Look at that, all your painting's done for you. There, can you see that lovely granulation there? Just think up some of the wonderful things that you could do with this. Now those of you that have already watched my video on painting the hibiscus flower, which was this one, will know that this is the effect that I got here. I dropped in some ink and I dropped on some granulating fluid, and that's how I got that lovely spotty effect in my painting. I had no idea where this was going to go. I just dropped it in, and as I did with this piece of paper here, I tipped it around, and that's the effect I got. So if you haven't watched that one, go and have a look. I think you'll enjoy it. I'm going to keep that, and I'm going to put some birds on here. If you've ever had a painting that's finished up looking rather mottled and you've been a bit disappointed with it, don't be too quick to blame yourself. It might be that you'd used granulating paints and you hadn't realised it. There are many different paints on the market, so it's very easy to choose those that don't granulate if you decide that that effect is not for you. If you'd like more videos like this, then consider clicking that subscribe button and the little bell icon, because that lets you know when I upload another video for you. If you've enjoyed this one, then give it a thumbs up. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Remember my motto, everybody. There is an artist in everyone. Goodbye for now.